Good morning. All right, on behalf of Pastor Andrew, welcome to Calvary Brevard. We're glad you're here. If you're visiting, then give us an opportunity to greet you and speak with you and spend some time with you. That'd be fantastic. I know we would love that. Thanks to all my family for showing up. That's like totally awesome. Let me pray, and then we'll begin, shall we? Father, your word is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Father, please bless this study of your word today and have your way with our time. I ask this for your honor and our good. Amen. All right, friends, we've been studying the Sermon on the Mount, and Andrew has taken us kind of up. Andrew and his father actually have brought us up to verse 21. I'll give you an outline of the Sermon on the Mount that's been helpful for me. It's been said, and I think it's true, that the Sermon on the Mount is the greatest sermon of all time. And when I started thinking about that, most sermons are 3-point sermons with 3 subpoints, right? And you go and you look through the Sermon on the Mount, it's like 30 points. And that's being conservative, really more like 50. And so you think, wow. But at the same time, you've got the greatest preacher of all time delivering the greatest sermon of all time. That's the fact of the matter. That's really what it is. So the Sermon on the Mount that's been helpful for me, because I'm an engineering type, this is the way my brain works, and I like a frame. Once I understand the big picture frame, and then I can hang details on it, that's just what makes good sense to me. So this is a good frame for the Sermon on the Mount. Verses 5, 1 through 12 are the character of kingdom people. This is what kingdom people are. It's really not a call. It's like, you should do this. You should be this. This is what kingdom people are. God makes you this way. Then you hear salt and light. Pastor West gave us a sermon on this. And it was the same thing, really. You are salt. You are light. It doesn't say you should have salt. You should have light. You should gin up your own efforts to be salt and to be light. No, this is what you are. If you're a believer, if you're a kingdom person. Then 5:17 through 20, really 5:17 through 7:6 talks about the entrance to the kingdom. How do you enter the kingdom? And really there's 2 main parts. One is by God's righteousness. You enter the kingdom by God's righteousness. That's the way it is. Not by your own righteousness. Andrew made this point last week that we, human people, are sort of hardwired to be rule keepers, to be scorekeepers. You know, we think, well, I can do this and I can do that, and I will elevate myself in terms of stature. But that's really not God's design. Jesus rejects the Pharisee tradition and practice, and he articulates God's intent. And that's what we'll start in on this morning. And then 7 through 27 is the kingdom is at hand. Jesus tells them the kingdom's here. And so that's a helpful outline perhaps for you. My sermon title is titled Outward Compliance or Inward Purity. Outward compliance or inward purity. So today we'll begin looking at the section of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus rejects tradition and practice of the scribes and Pharisees and clarifies God's original intent. The law is both external and internal. It's what you do, but it's also why you do it. It's not what you do alone, but why you do it. Last week, our text included Matthew 5, 19 and 20, which says this, "Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. This is interesting. It doesn't say you're a non-believer if you teach relaxed commandments. It says whoever relaxes them will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So they're still in the kingdom of heaven. That's interesting, something interesting to think on. Verse 20 says this, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So you think about that, and Andrew, I think I agree with Andrew. Easy for me to say I agree with Andrew, right? That this is the key to the whole thing. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. So then you sort of think about that. This is like a direct confrontation to the people that are there, to the people that are listening. So, you think about that. What would the people have thought that would have heard this in the original audience? Hearing this must just have been shocking. It must have just been shocking. Why? Something I say to my kids sometimes. They'll say something and I'll say, "What? Are you kidding me?" And that seems like that would be the reaction there. Why? The scribes and the Pharisees would likely have been the most religious people they knew. The most religious people they knew. How can anyone's righteousness be greater than the most religious people they know? And I started to think, who are the most religious people I know? Or who are people that others would say are the most religious people that they know? They may say monks. They may say the Pope. They may say Billy Graham. They may say, think in your own mind, who are the most religious people you know? And then for someone to say to you, your righteousness needs to be higher still than theirs. It would have just been shocking. So another thing to think about is, when we think of Pharisees today, we often think in disparaging or dismissive terms, right? We think, oh, they're Pharisees. I mean, of course they're doing this. They're Pharisees. Jesus called them, "You brood of vipers, you hypocrites." He railed against Pharisees. And so it like for me anyway, it leads me with this sense that, they're just not, they don't have it on the ball. But you think about what people would have seen. They prayed in public. They wore religious clothes. They were in and around the temple all the time. They were diligent about tithing. If you remember the story about tithing, you're very diligent on tithing. You give a tenth of these spices and all this, but you forego matters of the heart, is what Jesus said about them. So they're diligent about tithing. They taught the people. So it's easy to see why people would see them as very religious and very righteous and right, which means right with God. You can see how they would think that, and you could see how shocked they would be. And then also, it's interesting in that passage, what does Jesus mean about relaxing or keeping commandments? What does that mean anyway? And so we'll jump into our text today and talk more about that. So in verse 21 through 48 of Matthew 5, Jesus gives 6 examples. He says, if you relax these, you'll be considered least in heaven. If you keep these, you'll be considered great in heaven. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll by no means, you'll never enter. And then he gives these examples, and we'll look at the first one today. So if you'll turn with me to Matthew 5:21, we'll look. You have heard it said to those of old, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment." But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, "You fool," will be liable to the hell of fire. So, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Anger. Dallas Willard, an American philosopher who wrote on Christian spiritual formation, said this: anger is the most fundamental problem in human life. Anger is the most fundamental problem in human life. You sort of think about that, how you see anger, where we see anger. Makes you wonder if this has anything to do with why Jesus chose this as his first illustration. So, where do we see anger? In sports. People are losing, get fired up. Rivalries. I remember when I was a kid, my sister and I went to White County Central, Judsonia. They were the rival. And it was just a small town, a small Arkansas town, not far from ours. They were no different from us, but I don't know why. We hated them, and they hated us, right? So you see this, and sometimes people get spun up over nothing, for no good reason. Sometimes people are angry just when they show up. Sometimes people they just have an angry countenance, right? Some people get mad about calls from the referees. Wayne, if you're here, sorry about that. It's not you, I'm sure. On the road, someone gets cut off, right? You see this, anger flares up. Road rage. What's up with road rage? People's anger turns into violence, turns into aggression. In our society, some people seem inclined toward anger. In politics, in relationships, you see anger in marriage. You see anger in marriage. Sometimes, Peg and I have been married 32 years. Sometimes I get on her last nerve. And that's just the way it is, And sometimes she'll say, like God said to Jonah, are you right to be mad, Jonah? No, you're not. In families, you see a lot of anger in families, right? In short, where there are people, you see it. Isn't that true? Where there are people, you see anger. You just do. So then I was thinking, okay, what does anger look like when it comes out? When you see it? Anger is often also coupled with aggression. So a dirty look. That's the first time, that's some of the first ways you see it, right? Someone gives you the stink eye, right? And you're in trouble, especially with your parents. You know the face. And so they're displeased with you. Tone of voice is another one. Anger shows up in tone of voice. Outbursts or yelling. I remember early in our marriage, there'd be yelling, bah! It's like, why are you yelling? I'm not yelling. It's like, okay. And so sometimes when you get anger, people just sort of shout out. That's a common behavior. We also see body language, pointing your finger, shaking your fist. And think about this, violence and even murder. We see murder. Isn't murder, it's become a daily occurrence. I go and I visit with my dad, and he said, he lives west of Indianapolis, and he says, there's killing every single night in Indianapolis, every night. And so that's so common across the world, anger coupled with aggression, right? So when you're angry, a question I think is helpful for us to ask is, am I right to be angry? Am I right to be angry? You might say, what about righteous anger? Right? That'll be a common response. What about righteous anger? If it's righteous anger, what makes the anger righteous? What is it exactly that makes the anger righteous? Is most of the anger you see righteous anger, or is it personal conflict? It's mostly personal conflict. And so that's what Jesus gets into. So let's see what Jesus has to say. So as Pastor Andrew likes to say, I'm a note taker, so I take it as he's talking to me when he says this. For you note takers, here's my sermon outline. Point number 1, God is focused on the heart. God is focused on the heart. Number 2, peace is a priority. Peace is a priority. And number 3, reconciliation is urgent. Reconciliation is urgent. So, number 1, God is focused on the heart. Let's look again at verses 21 and 22. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So Jesus uses this phrase, you've heard it said, but I say to you, either exactly that phrase or very similar phrase like that in the next 6 illustrations that he gives in the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard it said, but I say. And so Jesus is illustrating the difference between what people were being taught and the truth of God's law. The reason why he says he focuses on do not murder, because all of us would likely say, well, I never killed anyone. I didn't murder anyone. And Jesus' point is, not so fast. It's deeper than that. God's original intent, God's law goes even deeper than that. And so I was thinking on this, and I think it's important to first recognize that Jesus is the Logos. He's the Word. He has the authority to clarify and correct. That's what Jesus does. He clarifies and corrects. They've said to you, well, I say. And so 1 John 1-3 says this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Would that include the law? Yes. Yes. So Jesus is the authority, and he has the authority to correct and to clarify. So the second point is, law keeping pleases God only if it aligns with the heart. The Pharisees' teaching relaxed God's commandment by focusing on external compliance rather than God's intent for people to have clean hearts. In our home church in Texas, when we lived there, our pastor's name was Leroy Patterson. Isn't that a fantastic pastor name? Leroy Patterson. And he had this object lesson. He would say, people, friends, family, be careful what you put in your mind, because before long it affects your heart, and before long it affects your actions. And he would use this, the mind to the heart to the action. Isn't that what you see in the Bible? When God talks about the heart, out of your heart, your mouth speaks. You act out of your heart. And so that's something probably I'll never forget. And it's just a simple object lesson, but it's a simple object lesson that conveys a truth of the Bible, a truth from God. I also want you to see here, murder is personal. The command, do not murder, is true. I might as well say, I never murdered anyone. Jesus goes farther and says it's deeper than that. There's more to the commandment than that. Then he gives 3 examples of personal relationship offenses. Think about that. He gives 3 examples of personal relationship offenses. Everyone who's angry with his brother, and that means to be irritated, usually from a personal offense. We live in a society where people are just so easily offended, right? Me too. Me also. The second example he gives, whoever insults his brother, whoever speaks to someone with contempt, right? Think about that. Speaks to someone with contempt. And the third is, whoever says, you fool. It seems like that word, you fool, is best translated, you have an empty head, or you're a moron. How often do you hear that, right? That's a common thing that you hear. You're a moron. And so Jesus says these things are all personal relationship offenses. So why does Jesus give these examples? I'll guess that it's true of all of us. It's true of all of us. Can anyone here say they've never been angry, they've never insulted someone, or never called someone a moron? No, probably none of us, right? Someone cuts you off in traffic, drives slow in the left lane. That gets on my last nerve, I swear to you, right? And so why? Why? And Peg, the bride of my youth, says, why are you in such a hurry? Why are you in such a hurry? Calm down. And she's right. Someone calls you a name, anger flares up. This made me also think about pet peeves. What are pet peeves? They're preferences most of the time, are they not? And then someone does something that's counter to your preference, and then you get peeved. How about any of these? You idiot. You must not have a brain in your head. I hate you. Sometimes you hear kids say this to parents, right? It's just a cringe moment. Kids will say that. I despise others for what they think or do. Or, I wish you were dead. I wish so-and-so were dead, right? Now, you may identify with some, none, all of those. I don't know. But I think it's true earlier in the quote that anger is a universal human problem, right? I hate to admit this to you, but I will, because this is case in point. I was just this week, driving by Tractor Supply. Car pulled out right in front of me. I mean, right in front of me, right? And as a reflex, I just said, idiot. Isn't this, unless it's a reflex. I didn't think on this. It just came out, right? And so I'm thinking at this and looking at this, what Jesus has to say here, and it's like, well, this is me. I have no idea what was going on with that driver. I don't know if they were off to the hospital. I don't know if they were in a hurry to get somewhere. I just don't know. I don't know. But I do know this. I've done the same thing to other people. I've done the same exact thing to other people. Don't we get mad over offenses that we do ourselves? Isn't that right? I want grace for myself, but I'm often unwilling to give it to others. I want grace for myself, but I'm often unwilling to give it to others. So, do you see the pattern? These examples have to do with personal relationships. Jesus gives no examples of righteous anger. Isn't that interesting? You'll say, why is that? How much of our anger is over righteous causes, or over the honor of the Lord, or any other truth here or ills we see in society? Righteous anger is a real thing. You know, you see it in the Bible. There are examples in the Bible. But Jesus doesn't talk about that. So I think there's a lesson in there for us also. So Jesus also says in that passage, there are 3 judgments of the behaviors. Liable to judgment, liable to the council, liable to the hell of fire. What's the point? These behaviors are serious and liable to judgment. These judgments are not reserved only for murder. And that's what we would typically think, right? These only have to do with murder, not being angry. So then you sort of think, okay, well, wait a minute. Is Jesus saying anger toward others and contempt of others is akin to murder? Yep. That is what he's saying. You can't, this is the thing. If you're up here speaking, you'd rather not say something like that, right? Why? Because people take offense. But this is what it says. And so we have to deal with this because this is here, and we have to think about it. So here's another question for you. Where does murder originate? In the heart or in the hands? Does murder originate in the heart or in the hands? Matthew 12:34 says, you brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? Jesus was talking to Pharisees here. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And doesn't it go back to the illustration? Careful what you think, because then it affects the heart, then it affects how you act, right? So, point 2, peace is a priority. Verses 23 and 24. So, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. All right. Personal conflict affects your worship of God. Isn't this what it says? Stop. Don't go on with worship. deal with this other issue that you have, then come back when your heart's clean, when your issues are resolved, then approach God. That's what it says. We're to prioritize making peace over worship. I also was thinking, well, that's pretty inconvenient. It says you're there. Leave your gift there, go and do this other thing, then come back. And so, wouldn't it be more convenient to present my offering and then go do it? So, think about this. Listen to this. Psalm 66:18 says, if I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. God would have us come with pure hearts. So, this is something for us to think about. What is the condition of your heart when you come to worship? You know, do you have something against someone? Does someone have something against you? Which we'll talk about in a minute. God would have you be cleansed and be pure in heart when you come to worship. Second thing I'd like you to see here is the problem may be with you. It says, if you are offering your gift, and remember that your brother has something against you. That's interesting perspective, right? The example doesn't say that if you have something against him. So, here's my question to you. Does God ever bring things to mind for you? You know, immediately something will come to your mind. I was asked to serve on a board of a ministry organization of a very good friend of ours. And immediately, one of the board members was a man named Wes Croskrey. And immediately, I remembered that I had offended Wes Croskrey, right? And so I told Steve, I said, Steve, I can't serve until I reach out to Wes Croskrey. He may not agree to have me serve with him on the board. And so I called Wes Croskrey, and I said, Wes, I did this to you, and I remember it like it was yesterday now. I didn't remember it for years, but I remember it now. And so I told him what had happened. I explained the situation, and then I asked for his forgiveness. And he said this, I don't even remember that. Isn't that funny? Right? You remember things, but he might remember. Sometimes you offend and they don't take offense, but sometimes they do. And so I think this is something for us to think about is the problem may be with us. You know, does God bring something to your mind? And if he brings something to your mind, go deal with it. You know, why is this coming into your mind? God would have you do something with it. Third point, reconciliation is urgent. Verses 25 and 26. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. So what do we see here? What do we see here? The need to reconcile is serious and it's urgent. It's serious. Jesus uses an example of being thrown in prison. And so you think, wow, that's pretty harsh. That's severe, you know. But the only thing you can conclude is this is a serious matter. In the first century and even in more modern times, if someone defaulted on a debt, they could be thrown into debtor's prison until their debt was fully paid. The problem is, once you're in prison, you got no way to make money, right? And so that meant they'd be at the mercy of family or friends to help pay their debt. If not, you're going to sit in prison. And that's what Jesus has to say here. So I think the point for us is the time is now. In verse 25, Jesus says, come to terms quickly while you're on your way to court. This is an interesting picture too. Your accusers charged you. A court date is also already set, and you're on your way to court. Judgment is imminent. Because in the example, Jesus said, it says, if you get in front of the judge, it's too late. So Jesus says, settle before you get into court. It's also interesting to me, the example focuses on coming to terms, not the terms themselves. It doesn't really say what the terms are. It just says, do it. So you might say, well, what if I do nothing? When I was in business, this would be sometimes a leadership technique. Somebody would come in and say, we have to spend $1 million for this and that and the other thing. And then you would say, well, what if I do nothing? What will happen? And then a lot of times people would say, well, I never thought of that. Well, doing nothing is an option. Might not be a good option, might not be the best option, but it's an option for sure. Jesus tells us what happens if you do nothing. Verse 26, truly I say to you, you'll stay there till your debt is fully paid. The point is, reconcile while you can. Do it now. Don't put it off. Reconciliation is important. Okay. Let me conclude. Does the Sermon on the Mount call us to try harder? No, it does not. You could take it that way, and you look at all these things. You should do this, and you should do that, and you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. They're imperatives, but that's not what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. Jesus corrects scribes and Pharisees and their teaching, and then gives a true description of the law. Is it to our advantage to understand what God would really have for us in terms of righteousness? Absolutely. The law mirrors the character of God. He is the perfect author and the perfect standard of perfect righteousness. The law is also intended to be a mirror for us to test our own character against the law. So the law is really to point us to the gospel. We can't keep the law. Who can avoid saying idiot when someone points out it's nature? I think it's my nature. It's a reflex, right? This needs to be God working in me. I'm not able to sort of pull myself up by my bootstraps and be a better person. I mean, you could do some of that, and it might appear that you're more righteous, but that's not the righteousness that God's after. Romans 3:20 says this, for by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. It should drive you to the gospel. Second point I want to make in conclusion is God is focused on the heart. The law is more than outward compliance. It's also about inward purity and the condition of your heart. 1 Samuel 16:7 says this, but the Lord said to Samuel, this is when he was choosing David. Samuel was looking for David. Do not look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. So Samuel said, well, this one, no. This one, no. This one, no. This is all of them. Do you have any others? Well, there's one who's out tending the sheep. Bring him. Really? God says, Samuel, you're not looking at the right thing. God saw David's heart. And that was what God was after, David's heart. Psalm 51, speaking of David, Psalm 51:10, written by David, says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me. Matthew 5:8, Andrew covered this for us already. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And then again, the Leroy Patterson example. Careful what you take in, because it affects your heart and affects your actions. Third point, peace is a priority and reconciliation is urgent. Personal conflicts negatively affect your relationship with God. Jesus encourages us to reconcile quickly. It's a serious matter, needs attention. The Bible says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Right? I remember, sorry Peg, I should have asked you if I could tell all these stories. Early in our marriage, I don't even remember what we were arguing about. Peg will likely know, but I don't remember. But I remember this. I wasn't wrong. Isn't that funny? I don't remember what it was about, but I wasn't wrong. And so she wanted me to apologize. We were married a short amount of time. I was like, why should... I'm giving you too much information. So I'm thinking, why should I apologize? I'm not wrong. I have nothing to apologize about. And she said this to me. Are you happy that I'm upset over this? And I was like, well, of course not. Of course I'm not happy that you're upset over this. Then that should be enough for you to apologize. Right? Stab right in the heart. But that's one of those things. I mean, she spoke truth to me. And it's one of those things I will never forget. Never forget. So does it matter what you're arguing about? You can't even remember 30 years later. So the point is, the relationship was fractured. The relationship was breached. That's enough to apologize over and to reconcile, right? The last point that I want to make is you can have peace with God. Amen. You can have peace with God. You might think, I can avoid murder, but I can't do what Jesus is saying to do. I can't do this. It's only by God's grace and power we can do what he commands. It's only by God's grace and power we can do what he commands. As God changes our hearts, actions follow. We have a gathering of, I graduated with 25 people in Arkansas, 25 people. And we have a gathering. I guess you could call it a reunion, but it's really a barbecue at someone's house. Sometimes I don't want to go because I'm ashamed of things that I did when I was a young man. You know, Andrew gave the quote sometime back about, it sticks in your craw. These things that were laughed about or dismissed when you were young, these come back to roost and they stick in your craw. And it's true of me. And so I'm thinking, oh, please, let's don't talk about this story or this story. And everybody wants to talk about the old times and the old stories. But it's shameful, a lot of those things for me, right? But I can't do anything about it. I can just use that as an opportunity to say, well, I'm forgiven for that, right? We believers follow God from a desire to be the people we are, his children, the people we see in the Beatitudes and the people who are salt and light. We do this because God's working in us, and that gives us a desire to be obedient. If we're not a believer, if we're not reconciled with God through Jesus Christ, we don't want to be obedient. We want to do what we want to do. Humans are self-focused, self-centered. This is just a truth. Good news, your righteousness can exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Your righteousness can exceed. There's a righteousness available to you, more righteous than anything that you could believe, the righteousness of Jesus Christ. God provides his righteousness that we need that allows peace with God, spiritual reconciliation, forgiveness of sins. You can be declared righteous. That's what justification is. You won't be just. We saw this on the scripture reading this morning and another example I gave you. No one will be justified by the law. What does justified mean? To be declared right with God. That's what it means. No one will be justified by keeping the rules. That's what it says. But we can be declared righteous and have fellowship with God through Christ's righteousness, by accepting Christ.